Welcome back, Victory Stitches. For those of you who have watched some of my other videos, you will know that I love to upcycle old fabrics into new projects. And because of requests from some subscribers and from some people in one of the Facebook groups I belong to, I'm going to show you how to make this cute bunny, which I happen to have made out of an old bedspread. So let's roll up our sleeves. We can do this. Today we're using Simplicity 8044, a little sewing pattern for soft toys with 3 different animals on it. Today we're making the rabbit. Now some of the other things you'll need polyester fibre fill to fill up and stuff your bunny, obviously sewing machine, thread, needles, pins, and a good set of scissors, and you can opt to embroider the eyes and nose on if you like, but today I'm going to be using safety eyes, which you can pick up from your local craft store. They are designed to go in from the front side of the face of the animal and through the fabric, and then on the other side you've got the washer that clips on and pushes right in, and it makes it very secure, nice and tight, and they shouldn't come off. However, follow the instructions that will be on the packaging. It may not be a good idea to give, even with safety eyes, to a baby or a very young child, say a child under 2 or 3, just in case it comes off. It's not worth the risk. You can also use for older kids or for your own decorations. You can use buttons to sew on for the eyes if you like, or like I said before, embroidered. Embroidered is the best option for little kids. So we are going to go down to my cutting table, where we will lay out the fabric and lay out the pattern, pin it and cut it. So I will see you down there. Right, here we are at my cutting table. We are going to make the rabbit today. So this pattern has 3 different animals. It's got the dog, the rabbit and the teddy bear, A, B and C respectively. We're going to make B, the rabbit. So I'm taking you first of all to the cutting layout diagrams and plans that each pattern comes with. So we go down to here where we've got B, rabbit. Now normally when you buy fabric from the fabric store, you will get it in either a 115 centimetre or 150 centimetre, or give or take a little bit, which is about a 44-inch or 60-inch width. So depending on which kind you buy, your layout will be different, because obviously with a 60-inch you've got a bit more width to play with, so you get a bit more economy. You don't need as much fabric and you can nest them a little bit closer together. But with the narrower fabric they have to pretty much top and tail. Or the beauty of this pattern is that each animal needs only 2 pattern pieces, front and a back. And with each pattern piece you cut 2 out, and they're going to be mirror images of each other. So let's just have a look at this pattern piece. This is the rabbit. According to the pattern layout we need pieces numbers 3 and 4. This is number 4, which is the back of the rabbit. We've got all sorts of lines and squiggles here which you don't need to be afraid of. First thing, as you can see, Simplicity 8044, that's the pattern registration number. We know we're making the rabbit, B, and it's the back. We've got piece number 4. Now it says to cut 2. So that is going to be the left and the right. So if you think about an animal or yourself, your left and your right are mirror images of each other. So when we cut this fabric out, if it definitely has a right side and a wrong side, which most fabric does, we will need to have one the right way and one round the other way. And we get that way by folding the fabric in half, so that automatically each piece will be the mirror image of the other one. This line here is the straight of grain line, or the grain line of the fabric. When you have fabric on a roll, you will have the grain running parallel to the selvage. The selvage are the ends that look like they're woven in, so they won't fray. The cut edge, where they cut that off at the fabric store, the bit that frays, will be perpendicular to this line. This just helps you line everything up. Now today I am making my rabbit out of an upcycled bedspread. These bedspreads were very popular in the 1970s. The fabric's called candlewick because it looks like lots and lots of little candle wicks, and it's a cotton. And here's a scrap I've actually got. This is only enough to cut piece 4 or piece 3. So I'll go and get some more fabric to cut the other one, but I just want to demonstrate pinning and cutting for you. So the beauty is I've actually got this folded right sides together. It doesn't matter if it's right sides or wrong sides together so long as it's folded. But I fold it this way because the grain is really easy to see because it's little ridges. So I'm going to use that as my gauge. So I'm going to take my pattern piece. Now I know I definitely don't have enough to put both pieces on this piece, unfortunately, so later on I'll go and cut the other piece out with some more that I've got stashed away. So I'm going with my little two-ended arrow and I'm making sure that that lines up nicely with the grain. In this case it lines up beautifully, looking at the lines underneath. I'll grab my pin cushion and I'm just going to pin in a few places to hold that down. I've got a nice sharp pair of scissors. These are quite old. They belong to my late father-in-law and he was an upholsterer, so these are very tough scissors. I want to use a good strong pair of scissors with this simply because it's so thick, but normally people would make this out of a thinner fabric. Ordinary sewing scissors will be fine. You can even use a rotary cutter, but when it comes to cutting curves I prefer to go the old-fashioned way. So I'm just going to keep my scissors nice and in control. I'm not going to cut too fast. I'm just cutting around right up to the edge of where the paper is. I'm going to ignore the little bites out of the pattern at the moment. I'll get to those later. They'll be easier to deal with when we're dealing with a smaller piece of fabric. We'll get all this other stuff out of the way. So it's all cut out now. I told you about the lint, I wasn't lying. There'll be plenty more on the floor in the sewing room before we're finished. Now these funny pointy things are a type of dart. Now if you've watched my other video fairly recently, I showed how to sew a dart that's more a dressmaking dart. The same rules pretty much apply. It's a matter of taking something two-dimensional and making it into something three-dimensional. So we're going to get a bit more shape and a bit more body to our little bunny. There's one down here. This is to give just a bit more shape down between the legs. There's also one on the back for the bottom, so he can sort of sit a bit better. Now the best way I find is to leave those darts till last and cut them out now. So I'm cutting out with the edge of the paper. I'm not following the dotted line. The dotted line is actually our stitching line. So I'm just going to go in there, get a little wedge out. There's one. This particular animal just has the two, one on the foot and one on the underneath the leg. And on the back of the rabbit we've got one on its back side and one on its hind leg as well, like this one. So it's a bit bigger a wedge. And as we sew it, you'll be able to see how that actually gives shape to the bunny. And the one last thing I would like to talk about are the notches. If we look closely at our pattern pieces, we can see what look like little V's here and there throughout the pattern. They're on strategic places. There's a double V over at the centre front. There's a single notch or single V down here. There's one on the forearm and there's one on the ear. And if we look at the back piece, pattern piece, we've got the corresponding ones and they will mat onto each other. So when you stitch front to back, you will be able to make sure that that notch lines up with that one. The front arm one lines up with this one, and the one under the back leg with this one. And there's two single notches which make the centre back. So what I do, just to show you that they actually line up, we stitch those pieces, and there's some up here by the top of the head as well. We make sure that they line up when we're sewing, and then we know we've actually got the pieces lined up correctly and they're going to give us the right shape. So to mark those notches on the fabric, I just do a little snip. I snip through the fabric and through the pattern piece, and just a little snip to make sure I can see without cutting a great big hole in there. And I do that when I'm dressmaking as well, so just a little snip. Just make sure I can see that. Right, I'm now going to go and retrieve the rest of my fabric to cut out the other piece, the back, to cut out two pieces from that, and then I will see you in the sewing room. Welcome back. Now we have both pieces cut. I'm working on the front at the moment. I'm going to unpin it, stick all the pins back in my pin cushion. Now the first instruction says to make the dart seam at the lower edge of the rabbit front sections. So those were those V shapes we cut out just before, and we're going to make those, it's going to turn something two-dimensional into something three-dimensional. This is the lower dart. So what we need to do is we need to join this edge to this edge. So it's a simple matter of just folding right sides together. So you've got a nice clean line, nothing overlapping. I'm just going to hold that in place with a pin, and I swivel around, and I'm going to do the one that's on the end of his back foot, his hind leg. Again, just match those up together, pin it in place. Now the seam allowance on this project is 1/4 inch, nice and small. It's just sewing a soft toy. You don't need a 1.5 centimetre, 5/8 of an inch like you do when you're dressmaking. So now we've got those two pinned together. Now I'm going to move my machine back, and I'm just going to stitch them. I'll start with that first one. Now if you've seen my other dart video, you will know you start from the open end of the dart and work towards that point. Keep the edge of the fabric where we cut it as your guideline. That's the outer edge. You want to go 1/4 inch in from that and parallel, so that both darts end up exactly the same. Because remember, we're going to do this on the second mirror image piece of the rabbit's front, so we need balance and symmetry. So just a wee back stitch, and then stitching down until we run off. It seems like you stitch for quite a while before you finally get off the end, but that's alright. And there we have one dart. I'm not actually going to tie the ends off. I'm just going to leave about 1 inch tail. It's not going to get a lot of wear and tear, hopefully. Unlike if this was a dress or a skirt that was going on and off and in the wash all the time. So when we open that up, we can see we've now got a bit of shape. And it's just going to give him a roundness, bit of shape to his body. So that's one. Round to the other side to do the one on the foot in exactly the same method. Starting at the open point of the dart, making sure those edges match up and are flush with each other. Take that pin out before you stitch over it. And run off. Trim your threads. And if we open that up, and you can see that's starting to give some shape to the foot. It's starting to make that 3D look. Now I'm going to go off and do the other front, and then I'm also going to do the back pieces. I will come back to you with one of the back pieces. One of the darts is a little more unusual, but I will see you back here very shortly. Right, you can see the little fella's got a bit of dimension now on his foot and on his wee bottom. My next instruction is actually not the back piece, so we'll come back to that, sorry about that. Stitch the centre front seam of the rabbit front sections. So that's the bit that goes right down middle front of him. So I'm going to put my two pieces together, right sides together. And remember, these will cut together, so they should match up. You can pin them in a few places if you like, just to hold them together. I'll just pin in a few strategic places. And we're going to stitch him together using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now, we talked about notches when we were cutting out our fabric. There are my two notches, my double notch. So I can see they match up, so I'm on the right track, so that's good. And down the bottom there. Just bring the machine back. So, remember, 1/4 inch seam allowance. Don't go too fast. This is mostly a straightish line, except when it gets around part of his head there. But just take your time. Machines can go nice and slow. They don't have to go at 100 miles an hour. And make sure that you've caught both ends nice and flush against each other, so you capture all of it inside that 1/4 inch seam allowance. We back stitch to secure that in place. And nice and steady. This may be a rabbit, but we're going to be the tortoise in this case. Now, when you're stitching on a curve, it does pay to go extra cautiously, especially when the curve gets more rounded and more defined. You can just manoeuvre the fabric with your fingers. If you find that gets a little bit too tricky, keep your needle down. You can just move, lift the presser foot, shift the fabric a teeny bit, do a few more stitches, needle down, presser foot up, swivel it just a little bit if you're finding it a bit tight going. Now in the neck down here, it will be very tight going because it's actually not a point, it is a very subtle curve. And I will show you that technique again. So I'm going to turn, but it's a bit tight, so I'm just going to lift and move. Keeping that needle in the down position even time I stop sewing, so I don't lose my place. And off we go again. The rest of it's almost straight, slight curve, so I'll just zap through and Spitfire mode to the end, and I'll catch up with you. Just at the end, just going to slow down, make sure we back stitch just to secure it. Oops. Needle up. Trim our threads, and if we open him up, this is what his face is going to look like. So you can see from sewing those curves, we've got a bit of definition. Now the next instruction is to clip the curves, clipping to the stitching at the small dot at the inner corner. Now this area here, we've got to clip because we've gone on an angle. If we try to push everything out, we're going to be straining at the fabric, so we get our scissors and we just clip a few up to the stitching, but don't, whatever you do, clip over the stitching because everything will unravel. This just gives us a bit of give so that when we open up and turn them around the right way, we won't get a strain or a stretching around that neck area. So any time you've got a concave curve like that, that's what you'll do. So now when we turn him around, he should sit a bit more comfortably. He's got a wee tummy there as well. Doesn't look much like a rabbit yet, but don't worry, he will. Now while I've actually got this in one piece, I am actually going to mark on the position of those eyes by using my pattern piece. Now, on the pattern piece is a wee circle right here, and that marks the position of each eye, and there's a little sort of funny shape there which is actually half of his nose, so I can also mark that on as well. I'm going to do the eyes actually just with a pin at this stage. I'll just pull that very carefully off. I'm going to mark it on the correct side of the fabric. So, put a pin in on the other side. So when I pull them apart, they'll each be marked. So on the other side, I'm going to go exactly the same through there. Pull them apart, and you can see where they are. I'm just turning over to the right side of the fabric. It's a little hard to mark on this sort of fluffy fabric, but I should have enough. I'm using bright purple, so it should show up. That'll be covered up by the safety eye, so it's not a bother. I'm going to attach those eyes now. I've marked with ink. I've got this pointy thing. It's called an awl, A-W-L. You can use a thick needle, and I just want to poke a hole right where that dot is. I'm going to push it through as much as I can, and even that isn't going to be big enough, but I can see quite clearly I've made a decent sized hole. But I am going to make that hole just a tad bigger using some snippers, just big enough to get that safety eye shank through. And just put that through, and you can see it poking through that side, and that's perfect. Now I'll take the washer, and that just clips on like that, nice and secure, and you just repeat for the other eye, and again for the nose. Starting to look a bit more like a rabbit now. So we'll just put the front aside, and we're on to the back. I've removed the pins. Now, this is a big dart that we're going to stitch up, but before we do, we are going to reinforce, according to the instructions, we're going to just reinforce this corner here, just by stitching along a little ways and down there about the same amount. Within the seam allowance, so 1/4 of an inch, just one piece at a time, and that just helps reinforce it, because later we're going to clip in that corner, so it just makes sure nothing's going to run away. So down to that corner, make sure your needle's down, and pivot, and then it just gives strength to that corner there, and we will repeat with the other side. As before, we are going to join this dart up. This gives shape to its bottom and helps it sit. So, folding, making sure that that's the point of the dart, that's up the top there, getting those raw edges lined up. You can put a pin in to hold it if you want. And we're just going to stitch down 1/4 of an inch in a nice straight line parallel to the edge of that dart. Back stitch. Get my thread tail out of the way. And repeat with the foot, just like on the front, and on the other side, the other back piece. So here we've got a couple of darts on. We're going to join these two together just like we did with the front sections. The only difference is sewing the centre back seam is we're not going to stitch the entire seam. We've got to leave an opening, otherwise we're not going to be able to get this rabbit full of stuffing. Now those two notches that were in the pattern, the back here and down here, we're going to stitch up to them and then carry on, so between those two notches will be our opening. So I'll just hold this in place with a few pins, but the two pieces are identical. So again, when you're stitching, start at the top, back stitch, 1/4 inch seam allowance, down. Remember, if you're going over a curve and the curve gets a bit sharp, just stop, needle down, lift the presser foot and just pivot slightly just to help you round, particularly that corner around the neck. And then stop when you get to that first notch, break off your thread, reinforce it by back stitching. Same again here, pick it up from here, back stitch all the way down to the end, back stitch at the end, and we'll show you what's next after that. Right, both back pieces, left and right, are stitched together. Again, just like I did with the front, I've gone into that tight curve and I've clipped up to the stitching line but not over it, just to give a bit more movability and flexibility there. Now, if you remember, we did the reinforcing. It's not very easy to see with this light thread. We did the reinforcing on that corner down there. We need to clip from where that corner is up to where the stitching is, but not, again, not going over the stitching. It just gives us an ability to move. And on the other side, we're going to join front and back together now, right sides together. I'll just grab the front. So, now you can do this in stages if you like. Might be easier, especially if you're a beginner. Now, the instructions on the pattern do say to press darts this way or that way, but honestly this fabric is so thick I'm just not going to even bother with my iron. But I have just pressed them open because it's so thick. I don't want to push them to one side and end up with a great big clump under the machine, and I think it's better just to press them open just with my thumb and finger and then help them through the machine that way. Everything is matching centre seams, those notches we talked about when we were cutting fabric. There's the matching, more or less matching darts. You know, if I'm going to match those centre seams first, because they are both in the centre, I'm just going to pin those two together. Now I know those notches have to match up, so luckily they do. Actually the darts don't quite match up, they're slightly wider apart on his bottom than they are on his front, so I'm just going to make sure that they look even. And they do, so that's fine. So I've just flattened them out to make it a little bit easier on the machine when I come to stitch, because this material is so thick and plush. Now I'm going to go around one of the legs. So this is the underside of the leg. I've got 2 more notches and hooray, they match up. I've got quite a few curves to sew this time round, so remember that technique. Needle down, lift your presser foot, pivot the material slightly just to help it along with those tight corners and tight curves. Now when we get up to those foot darts, pressing them open, they're going to match up with each other. I'm going to pin them together just there. And I'm going to keep pinning. I'm going to make sure that the crease in the ankle matches on both sides. The pattern has been designed so that the front maps to the back very, very easily. You can actually do this in stages if you like. You don't have to do it all as one continuous seam, because it is quite a bit. If you're not used to stitching slowly for quite a while, it can be a bit hard on the shoulders. So just take breaks if you need to. But the more you practice, the smoother it will get for you. Right, and I've got up to the other end of the centre seams. So I've just got that corner from the ear to the head matched, and my centre seams again matched. That's at the top of his head. So I'm going to stop pinning there and I'm actually going to start stitching. So I've got half a bunny pinned and half a bunny's wide open. That's okay. I'm just going to do half at a time. Makes it more manageable. So I'm starting down the centre bottom, going all the way around the leg, body, upper leg, face, ear, up to the centre top of his head, and then I'm going to stop. So you'll just see highlights of the stitching where we go around tricky corners and where we go over thick pieces, just so you can see how to do that, but the rest is pretty much sewing like anything else. So I'm going to start just before that centre seam. 1/4 inch seam allowance as always. Don't forget to reinforce with a back stitch. I'll take my pins out as I go. So when you're sewing, just make sure that you've got nothing caught under here that's going to get caught up in your stitching later. There's a lot of bulk in this, so you just want to go slowly and just be careful that you're not catching bits in where you don't want to be catching bits. Right, I'm coming up to the toe of that first back foot. So it's going to get a bit tight in there, so we're going to do that lifting and pivoting. Coming up to that foot dart, and it's double thickness, so there's 2 of them, so I'm just going to go very gently over. And we've almost finished the foot. Now, where his ankle is, there's actually a sharp bend. It's a little bit more than a 90-degree angle, so I'm going to go along to that, and I'm going to keep my needle down, and I'm going to actually properly pivot it around as if I was sewing a corner. And down we go again. The rest is pretty straightforward. Same sort of thing when we get to the front paws. Just go easily around those curves, and I will see you when we get up to the ears. Actually, I think we will stop, we'll pause, take a pause at the ears and go into that in a bit more detail. We're now at the area where the ear meets the face, so I've just gone to the corner there and I'm lifting my foot with my needle down and pivoting about 90 degrees, foot down, and off I go again. That just gives that nice sharp corner. It's not a curve, that one, it's definitely a corner. So we're going to stitch the ears together. With the other 2 animals on this pattern, the dog and the bear, the ears are much smaller, so the rabbit's a good exercise in sewing a nice long area with a big curved end too. So mostly straight, and we're going to start getting into that curve any second. Slowing down, turning that fabric, helping it out just where necessary. Machines want to sew in a straight line, so we just have to very gently help them deal with curves. Almost up at the other side where the ear joins the head, and we're going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to stop, needle down and pivot. Well, it's a bit more than 90 degrees, but it's still a definite corner. Needle down. We've got a slight curve at the top of the head. Just take that nice and slowly until we get to the centre. That seam is that we did earlier. Now it's getting a little bit tricky to get over some of the bulk here. I'm actually going to increase my stitch length a tad, up from 2.5 up to 3, just to help it over. And there we go. So back stitch and we're done. So that's 1/2, and I'll just put my stitch length back to normal. That is 1/2 done. Welcome back. It's actually day 2 of the bunny construction. Our camera battery ran out yesterday, so hence the different clothes today. Come back to a new day. Now I have finished sewing as promised. I have done the other half of the bunny outline, and I have, in all the little corners and tricky areas, I have snipped into where right up to the stitching line, but not over the stitching line because we don't want to break that thread. So that's in the corners of the ears, the neck, the curves in the neck. I've just snipped a few snips in there. That's going to make it easy to turn around. Now here is the hole in the bunny that we did when we did the centre back seam. Remember, we left that gap, and we're going to use that for turning it around. So just put the hand in. It's a little tricky sometimes to do the ear because it's narrow down here, but it's just a matter of trying to pull everything through that hole. Turning the little critter inside, or right side round now. And remember, because we've back stitched at each end of that opening, our stitching should not come undone, so you can put a little bit of pressure on. The front legs are a bit narrower, so rather than trying to get my big meaty hands in there, I'm actually going to use the blunt end of a knitting needle just to give a little bit of assistance in pushing that out. And the knitting needle is also going to come in handy when doing those ears. Also, to get everything, to make sure everything's nice and smooth, I'm just running that end of the knitting needle, I'm putting it through there, and I'm pressing it against the seam just to make sure that there are no tucks and no bits are missing. Everything's being pushed out nicely, so when we go to put our stuffing in, all the little nooks and crannies will be filled. You remember when we did, on the back legs, we did those darts at the very beginning of the project. It's not very easy to see because of the nature of this fabric, but there's that dart that we stitched, and it's actually perpendicular to the seam where we joined the two fronts and back together, and that's just going to give us a bit more of a three-dimensional foot with like a little toe. Now the only thing left is the ears. Now with this rabbit, his ears are not going to be stuffed, so we actually are going to stitch down from the top ear corner down to the lower ear corner. It is marked on the pattern, but I'm actually going to eyeball it, and I'm going to probably just mark it with a couple of pins. So from here through to up here where that corner is, that corner that we clipped, and I'm just going to follow the contour, so I'm going to do a slightly curved line, and that's going to hold the ear separate, so when we come to stuff his head, the stuffing isn't going to migrate in towards the ear and cause his head to cave in. So back to the machine. One corner to the other. Slightly back stitch just to make sure it's secure. And back stitch at the other end. Snip those threads nice and close because we are on the right side of the fabric now. Cut the other ones off. And you can't even see it, especially in this plush fabric. And we'll just repeat with the other side, and then we'll come back and start stuffing. Time to get stuffed. So, or stuffing really. We're going to fill this bunny. I'm using This is from Spotlight, which is common in Australia and New Zealand, and it's just a polyester fibre, carded polyester fibre, so it's completely synthetic. So even though the bunny is made of cotton, it's not good to get in too hot an area because we don't want to melt that that fleece that we're putting in. But it just comes in bags of 500 grams or a kilo, whatever. And it's lovely, soft, mouldable filler. I usually try to use not too much in one go, especially when you're getting into smaller areas. It's easier to mould. So I'm going to start at the top and start with his head. Now, one thing that's easy to do when you're stuffing a soft toy is to underfill it. But it does settle a little over time, so don't be too afraid to get quite a bit of stuffing in there. If you can't get a hold of the purchase, if you can't find a place to purchase it, or you decide you want to try being a bit more creative, something that I've also done, and essentially it's the same product, old pillows. And I've taken the cotton covering off. You can see this was a pillow. This is actually the fibre fill. So all you need to do with this is just gently, and it has compacted together, just gently take some off and just work some life back into it by just teasing it apart, and you've got a perfectly good, cheap, upcycled alternative for filling up your soft toys. And we'll just get in there and use your fingers and just make sure you're following the contours. See, I can feel that's still quite soft. He needs quite a bit more brain matter before he's ready to move on to the next bit. And he's really starting to look like a rabbit. I'm going to move down the body. I'm going to do the arms next, and I'm going to fill them in the same way, making sure I fill up those contours reasonably firmly, but at the hinge where the arm joins the body, I'm going to make it just a little thinner, just so his arms can move. So I'll come back when we've done that. Just about finished stuffing the arm. It feels quite nice and firm. I have been using, especially because it's a narrow channel, I have been using my trusty knitting needle just to help push that fibre fill down there, adding a reasonably small piece at a time so you don't end up with any unsightly lumps. A little bit more. A wee bit more again. So now the arm is pretty well filled. I'm going to add just a small amount more, but at a thinner rate, coming out of the arm and into the body, just so that we've got enough so that his little arms can move. So I'm starting to stuff into the neck now. I'm not completely devoid of stuffing in that arm area, but compared with, this is quite firm and this is quite loose here, so we can actually move his arms. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to do the other arm, and I'm going to work my way down the body, and I'm going to do the back legs in exactly the same way as I did the front legs. I'm going to get that knitting needle in there, putting the fibre all the way down to the toes and then into the heels, and I will see you back here when we are ready to close up. And he's nearly done. So we've got the arms a little thinner here so we can move his arms, and the same with his legs. Now I've almost finished filling him. His chubby little body now is just about done. So there's just a little bit of a gap here. I'm just going to put the last few pieces of stuffing in. Feels about right, I think, just a little bit in there. Right, now we're ready to stitch him up. So I'm going to use a ladder stitch for this. This is a hand stitching job. Now, the beauty of using this kind of fabric is it does hide a lot of sins, which is quite good, because hand stitching shut a soft toy, while not a difficult task, you don't want it to be really obvious exactly where you've hand stitched it. So I've got my needle and thread, I've threaded it double and just attached a little knot at the end for anchoring it, and I'm going to start down the bottom. I'm actually going to go in and under so my needle comes out at the top, so I'm going to hide that knot. Here we go. Now remember, we have a quarter of an inch seam allowance. So what I'm just going to do is fold over about a quarter of an inch. Hope you can see that all right. It's a bit difficult with this fluffy fabric. I'm just going to take along roughly where I've folded just maybe a quarter of an inch length seam, and pull that through. So that's on this opening. Now on the other opening I'm going to do the same down here. In fact, I don't really need to follow it, I'll just go fold it, just go at about a quarter of an inch in. Now when I pull that, it should actually suture them together. And I'm just going to keep going up in that invisible line that I've made about a quarter of an inch away from that raw edge, coming back to where the needle came out before. And on the other side, pull it tight, and you can actually start to see where it's been closed, but it's because of all the fluff and bits, it's not really obvious. That, like I say, that is the beauty of this fabric. Making sure that both my raw edges are still the same length, otherwise we will be in trouble. So another one there and one there. And I'm just going to keep doing that until I get up to the top. So we'll probably go in Spitfire mode now. The only time hand stitching will become a quick job. Just about done now. We've got about a centimetre left. I'm just going to close up the last couple of stitches in here and then close it off. It's a little tricky. Right. So now we've got his back all closed up, but we do have the thread that we need to fasten off. I'm just going to, I don't know if the camera can pick that up, but just at the end where the thread is coming out, I'm actually just going to do make a small stitch. It's only catching maybe a few strands of the fabric. And I'm going to go over that about 3 times. That just secures it. One more. And then I'm going to put that needle in there and out somewhere else. Be careful not to prick yourself. Trying to find that needle coming out the other side. Ah, there it is. So it's in there, out there. Just give it a bit of a pull and we can just snip right close to the fabric, and then the tail of that thread disappears back into the body of the bear. And that is that. And when you finish stuffing your bunny, you might find him a little bit out of shape. Mine was a little wider, so it's just a case of just moulding into shape just to make sure it's sitting right. It's very forgiving filling, so if a little kid plays with and gets it squished, you can just mould it back into place just gently with your hands to make sure he's sitting right. And there you go. And just to showcase some of the other soft toys I've made, all out of reclaimed fabrics. The very first one I made was also a rabbit, made out of fabric I picked up at the thrift store. with some other fabric from my stash to line his ears just to give a little bit of a contrast. And then I put a little bow on him. I've also made the dog, which was made out of a skirt that I picked up from the thrift store, and the skirt had two types of fabric in, so we had the darker green and the light and the white with a little bit of green on it to contrast. So I've actually made him in both halves, so he's almost like Harley Quinn. He just needs his little nose stitched on, that's the only thing. And of course he's done with buttons, just to show you don't have to go and get the safety eyes, but remember, buttons around little kids, no, definitely not. Keep it as safe as possible for little kids. And the most recent one I made before the rabbit was the bear, and this is out of a flannelette sheet that I picked up at a thrift store for next to nothing, and it's a king size sheet, so there's going to be a number of soft toys made out of the one sheet. So it just goes to show. And there's a little bit of stitching at the back, which obviously with this type of fabric you have to take a little bit more care. But it just goes to show you can make new things out of old. So, if you like this video, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. Please leave your comments below if you have any questions, if you want any other techniques demonstrated or any other projects shown. I'm happy to oblige, I read all the comments. Don't forget also to click on the little bell, which will give you a notification in your inbox anytime a new video comes up. And happy sewing! You're very cute. You're very cute. Yes, you're adorable. And you're an attention seeker.